Hi, this is Magda from the Wnętrza channel, and in this episode I'm happy to announce that we've already finished the floor sanding. Do you remember the previous episodes from this room? There were a lot of things here. There was still old furniture, including a sofa bed, a table, lots of tools, but of course for sanding you have to take all of that out. So finally it's perfectly tidy here, and it'll probably never be this tidy again. Because, you know, over time the furniture will come. There's going to be a mezzanine here, so it probably will never be as empty as it is now. So we can enjoy this fantastic echo, which will definitely be heard in the video. I don't know if I'll be able to do anything about it. There's also a fly buzzing around, but I hope you can't hear it. I hope the fly is only annoying me. And as for the sanding itself, let's get into the details. We rented 2 machines. One large floor sander, which looks like it's about 50 years old and it's very heavy. And it had a wide strip of sandpaper in the form of a belt, which simply rotates when the machine is running. And the second one was a small floor sander, you could say a little sander, a tiny sander. But it was constructed completely differently because it had round sandpaper. Generally, it's a tiny little device that's meant to get up to the walls so you can nicely clean right up against the walls. Because that big machine, well, it was hard to handle it near the walls. And also, well, it's not that maneuverable, so the idea was for these machines to complement each other. Additionally, we also had a regular handheld belt sander. And it turned out that it could also be useful here. But let's start from the beginning. The weekend was approaching. As you know, everything is closed on weekends, especially on Sundays, and we needed to rent this machine to get started here. So just in case, we rented it on Friday. We didn't even have the nails hammered in yet, because we were worried that there would be a problem over the weekend and we'd be left stranded, so we decided to rent it on Friday. If necessary, we could have returned it on Monday, but we found a rental place where we could also return it on Sunday. But we were hoping that maybe we could manage to return it on Saturday. On Friday we'd hammer in the nails, on Saturday we'd sand the floor and return it in the evening. So that was, the ambitious plan. But of course it didn't go that quickly. Because it never goes as quickly as a layperson might think. However, sanding machines are only half the battle when it comes to floor sanding, because before you can even start working, you first have to hammer in the nails. Because if the floor sander runs over a protruding nail, it can simply get damaged. And just imagine, here on about 23 meters, because it's a small apartment, and we don't count the bathroom since we don't sand there. So about 23 meters, and there were hundreds of nails here. 300, 400, we didn't count each one exactly, but that's an estimate. And these nails are arranged in lines, so in a way it's easy to hammer them in. Because each board rests on the beams, and when a beam is in a certain place, all the nails have to be above it. So wherever the beam runs, the nails run in a straight line too. It might seem obvious, but the thing is, over 100 years, different people have hammered all sorts of things here, and it turns out you can find nails everywhere. So, first of all, we had to hammer in the main ones and the ones that were visible, and then once we started sanding, we had to go around and check if any nails had appeared in visible spots. If one is hammered in deep and you can't see it, then it's fine, right? It can stay there, but if it starts to show, that's when you need to hammer it in. And we didn't have that kind of, how should I call it, that kind of device for automatically hammering in those nails. So the machine applies the force to hammer it in. We only had a heavy hammer and something like that. Take a look. You'll be able to see it against the light. You can see it a little. It's like a pin. It looks a bit like a pen, but it's heavier. And here it's smaller at the end, and here it's a bit bigger. And you just put it against the nail here and hammer it in. And it's not like when you hit it, the nail goes in right away and that's it. Some nails hold on tighter and just don't want to go in any further. No, we'll feel where we are. And you have to hit them harder. Some of them aren't above the groove, they're just in a random spot on the board. And then the board kind of springs, and it's also hard to drive those nails in deeper, so then you have to pry them up and take them out. It was just a wild ride. And those few hundred nails, I'd like to say that we were hammering them in, but actually that wasn't my job because, well, let me tell you, it's not that easy to hammer in those nails. So that task went to the stronger person in our two-person team. And I don't envy them because it was a total nightmare. Just listening to that sound was already hard, and actually hammering must have been totally exhausting because there are a few hundred nails here. About 400, I think. So you can imagine you can't do this in an hour because it's not like you just tap and then the next tap. It's just that you spend a moment on each nail. And it took the whole evening on Friday and then another half a day on Saturday. So in fact, we rented all the equipment too early because during the first day we weren't able to use it. We thought we'd be faster with those nails because when we did a test earlier with just one sample, it went in without any problem, but it turned out that it was, the most cooperative nail of them all, so it was a bit unlucky. But oh well, hindsight is 20/20. Sometimes you think you're prepared, but you're really not. Next time, we'll know that first we need to get a tool that's more helpful for hammering in nails, and second, to do that first and only then go get the floor sander. Sanding in general is basically just running the floor sander over the entire floor. And I came across a recommendation that it's best to go diagonally because that way any differences in the heights of the individual boards even out nicely. And then you even out the edges where the floor sander couldn't reach. First you use sandpaper with the lowest grit, the ones with the coarsest grain that sand the most, and then you use finer and finer ones. You can start with around 20, then 60, 80, 60, 80, 100, 120, 180. If your heart desires, you can even smooth it out with 200. It doesn't matter. It's just about the rules that first we cut and then we smooth it out more. And in theory, it all sounds simple. But in practice, it turned out that, first of all, this floor is so uneven and has such dips that even after several passes, the sander doesn't reach some areas at all. At the same time, there's paint everywhere underneath here. I saw that this floor was kind of brownish, but I thought that after so many years of applying stains, varnishes, and so on, it was nothing unusual. But there was just paint underneath. And this paint, when it came into contact with the sander, especially the one for the edges, it just melted and clogged up the whole sandpaper, so it really wasn't possible to sand there. The big one was doing pretty well. The only problem with it was that it couldn't reach everywhere, and it couldn't get to the edges either, so how do you clean those edges? Well, it turned out that the belt sander we had was a lifesaver. I think it had a lower speed and didn't melt the paint as much, although of course it did get clogged after a while, but not right away. And it was possible to clean those hard to reach spots with it. What's more, after many passes and renting the machines for another day, which is already the third day, the floor sander still doesn't reach. It still wasn't reaching some spots because the boards were just too uneven. And I imagine that if you were sanding a parquet floor that was perfectly even, then things would actually go just like in theory. But when it comes to boards that have such unevenness that you can feel it when you run your hand over them, and they're really big uneven spots, then I don't know how many days we'd have to sand here to actually make it a completely even surface. And what's more, there are also knots here. And the thing about knots is that they're harder, so it's difficult to make the knot and the softer wood around it actually level out flat. So at some point we just put that theory aside a bit and took the belt sander and manually went over all the spots where there was still paint left. Is this the proper way to do it? Probably not. Is the floor beautiful? In my opinion, yes. So here everyone has to judge according to their own conscience whether it was reprehensible or justified, but it is what it is. We didn't want to rent the machines for another day anymore. I think it turned out nice anyway. However, there were some disasters, because while sanding with that belt sander, after many, many hours, I was so tired that I started making mistakes. And those mistakes included, for example, leaving my gloves behind. Somewhere, I don't know, I went to get something, took them off for a moment, and then forgot to go back for them. And then I continued sanding without them. And it ended up with me running over my finger once and nothing happened. I was even surprised because I expected that with the power of that grinder and the coarse sandpaper, it would really mess up my finger, but nothing happened. So satisfied, instead of learning my lesson and going to get gloves, I just kept working. And it ended with me running over my leg, so now I have a little wound here, and then I hit my finger again, but this time a different one, and this time it actually bled and it still hurts. So I don't recommend it. Work with gloves, masks, and goggles, and even goggles for this kind of work with a handheld grinder, definitely. They seem essential to me. Because honestly, your finger will heal, but if something gets into your eye in an unfortunate way, it could be a disaster. I'm most worried about my eyes when doing this kind of renovation work. No, but fortunately a disc sander isn't like an angle grinder with a diamond blade, which could probably even cut off a finger. So here the work is thankfully safer. My shoes. After all this sanding and scraping work are already worn out. I'll have to replace them with new ones, but it's actually good timing because we're getting close to finishing the dirtiest part of the work. There's still something left in the bathroom, some touch-ups with the plaster that need to be sanded by hand. I still plan to clean a bit more of the brick here, and the window recesses still need to be finished, but we're really close to being done with all this dust. Once we protect the nice floor here, then we'll move on to painting, which makes a different kind of mess. There will be priming, painting, and then there will still be some things left to do. The kitchen, refreshing the windows, and the doors also need to be painted. Actually, since for now we're not planning any major renovations, we're leaving that for the future because we're a bit short on ideas, especially regarding how the doors look from the outside. I don't want to show you that, but from the inside they're so beautiful, wooden, and from the outside there's something installed on them. We'll figure that out further down the line. And here, where you're looking at me from, there will be a mezzanine. So of course, when building the mezzanine or even assembling the kitchen, there are some cuttings, so it gets a bit messy too. But still, it's not the same as during those earlier stages when the dust was just everywhere and you had to wear a mask. Your whole outfit covered in dust, and even when you leave the apartment, you leave these dusty footprints, right? That's the worst, the messiest stage. And after that, it's going to be nice and tidy. We have a bathroom so you can wash up. Once we have a kitchen, it'll be perfect. If at first, when I showed you this apartment, you couldn't really see its potential, I think now it's much easier for you to see it. Let me know in the comments, and of course remember to subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and see you next time. Bye.